The cheer captain grabbed my stomach in front of everyone, shook it, and told the squad, "Imagine this landing on your neck." When I landed a triple full on one foot, she whispered, "What the fuck did we just do?" I stayed silent. That was 10 months ago. Today, she's still in juvenile detention, and her dad's in prison. The cheerleaders said I was too fat to try out and tried to have security take me away. Then they found out I'm a national champion. I'd moved to Jefferson High after winning my 3rd consecutive national gymnastics title, needing a fresh start after my parents' divorce. I knew I didn't look the part. At 5'2" and 160 pounds, I had thick thighs and a soft stomach that my leotards couldn't hide. But that had never stopped me from absolutely killing it on the mat. These girls didn't know I could throw a standing full on concrete and had been winning medals since I was 12, baby fat or no baby fat. The cheer captain Chloe looked me up and down when I walked in, her eyes stopping at my stomach, and she actually laughed out loud. "Are you lost? The chess club meets in the library." When I said I was there for tryouts, she called her co-captain Hazel over and pointed at me like I was a circus act. This girl thinks she's trying out for cheerleading. My face burned, but I stayed calm, remembering that my old coach had called ahead to recommend me, though clearly that message hadn't made it to the squad. But I was fine with letting my talent speak for itself. Then Chloe said they'd run out of tryout uniforms in my size, even though I could see stacks of them in boxes behind her. She handed me a tank top in size small that wouldn't even fit over my sports bra and said, "Maybe this will motivate you to lose weight before next year's tryouts." The other girls trying out stared as I had to wear my regular gym clothes while everyone else matched. When we started warm-ups, Hazel stopped the music and announced they needed to discuss my reliability issues. She explained to everyone that overweight people lacked discipline and self-control, so they couldn't be trusted to show up for practices or remember choreography. If she can't control what she puts in her mouth, how can we trust her to control her body in the air? During stretches, Chloe noticed me watching one of the male cheerleaders demonstrate a back tuck with terrible form and assumed I was staring at his body. "Oh my god, she's here to perv on the guys," she announced. She knows boys like this would never look at her, so she's using tryouts to get close to them. She called the guy over and told him I'd been eye-fucking him, making him visibly uncomfortable as he moved to the other side of the gym. Hazel decided I needed to be evaluated for safety and brought out a measuring tape. She wrapped it around my thighs in front of everyone, announcing the numbers out loud, but then she grabbed my stomach with both hands and shook it violently. "This could kill someone if we tossed her," she said. "Imagine this landing on your neck." She actually made other girls come feel my stomach for safety awareness, each one poking and grabbing while I stood there frozen. When skills demonstration started, Chloe announced that I posed a structural risk to the gym floor and would have to be spotted by 4 people for any skill. She made the male cheerleaders surround me for safety, while telling them I'd probably use it as an excuse to fall on them since girls like her get desperate for physical contact. They stood around me in a circle, making it impossible to even attempt a cartwheel. I tried to break through their circle to get to the mat, but Hazel grabbed my hair and yanked me backward. "You're going to hurt someone!" she screamed. When I pulled away, she slapped me across the face, the sound echoing through the gym, and I fell to the floor. "That's assault!" she yelled immediately. "She just assaulted me! Someone call security!" Even though everyone saw her hit me first, the other cheerleaders started backing up her lie. I was still on the ground when Chloe grabbed my ankle and twisted it. It popped so loudly you could hear it through the whole gym. "Oops, looks like you tore something," she said as pain shot through my leg. "Guess you can't try out after all. Too bad you're so clumsy." She stood up and announced I'd injured myself trying to do skills I wasn't capable of, then told security I was trespassing and refusing to leave after hurting myself. She's faking an injury for attention, probably hoping to sue the school. Get her out before she causes more problems. That's when the head coach walked in demanding to know why someone had called security to tryouts. Before anyone could answer, I pushed myself up despite the pain in my ankle and took 3 running steps into a round-off back handspring double full, landing it perfectly on my good foot. The gym went completely silent as I immediately rebounded into a standing full, then another, fighting through the pain to travel the entire length of the floor with skills that most college cheerleaders couldn't dream of attempting. "Oh my god," Chloe whispered, her clipboard slipping from her hands as she watched me stick a triple full on one foot. "What the fuck did we just do?" Coach Walker pushed through the crowd of frozen cheerleaders and immediately pulled out her phone while yelling for someone to get the athletic trainer. Her face went from confused to angry as she watched the video someone had just sent her, showing everything that had happened during tryouts. I could see her jaw tighten as she watched Chloe grab my stomach and shake it, then yank my hair backward, then slap me across the face, and finally twist my ankle until it popped. The gym stayed dead silent while she scrolled through more angles that kids had been recording on their phones. She looked up from her screen and her voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Everyone against the wall now!" Every single person scrambled to line up against the gym wall while she pointed at Chloe and Hazel. "You two, principal's office. Security will take you." The security guard who'd been called earlier grabbed both girls by their arms and started walking them out while Coach knelt down next to me on the floor. 2 of the male cheerleaders helped me limp over to the bench while the athletic trainer finally rushed in with his medical bag. He started checking my ankle, moving it carefully while I winced, and confirmed it was badly sprained but nothing was broken. Coach sat down next to me and kept apologizing over and over, explaining that she'd been stuck in a meeting when my old coach had called to recommend me, and the message never made it to the squad captains. The other kids trying out were all whispering and pulling out their phones, and I could see them posting videos to Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat. My hands were shaking as I held the ice pack against my ankle, finally feeling the pain now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Principal Harrison walked into the gym about 10 minutes later, and Coach immediately showed him the security footage on her laptop, plus all the videos kids had sent her. He sat down and took my statement while watching each video, his face getting darker as he saw more angles of what Chloe and Hazel had done. My mom burst through the gym doors 20 minutes later, practically running across the floor to get to me. She dropped to her knees and started checking my ankle, then touched my face where I could feel the bruise forming from Chloe's slap. Coach explained everything that had happened and showed her the videos, and I watched my mom's face go from worried to absolutely furious. She grabbed Coach's phone and watched the video of Chloe shaking my stomach while making other girls touch me, then turned to the principal. "This is assault, battery, and harassment. We're pressing charges today." The principal said the school would need me to get a full medical exam for their liability paperwork, so my mom drove me straight to the emergency room. The ER doctor took photos of my swollen ankle, the red mark on my face from the slap, and checked my scalp where it hurt from getting my hair pulled. She wrote everything down in an official medical record while the nurse took more photos for evidence. While we waited for x-rays, I checked my phone and found dozens of messages from kids at school I didn't even know. Most of them were sharing their own stories about Chloe and Hazel being mean to them or other people they knew. One message stood out from someone named Isabella Williams Martinez, who said she graduated last year. Her message said she'd been on the cheer squad but quit after Chloe did similar stuff to her, and she'd been keeping screenshots and and videos of Chloe's behavior for 2 whole years. She said she had proof of what Chloe called initiation traditions that were really just ways to get rid of anyone she thought might be competition or didn't fit her idea of what a cheerleader should look like. I stayed up way too late reading through everything Isabella sent me. Screenshots of group chats where Chloe rated girls' bodies with number scores and planned ways to make them quit. Videos of her and Hazel doing the same stomach-grabbing thing to other girls during tryouts. Even a recording where she bragged about making a freshman have a panic attack on purpose. My ankle was killing me by the time I finally fell asleep around 3 in the morning, and when I woke up the next day, I could barely put any weight on it, even with the pain meds the hospital gave me. Mom was already on the phone with her friend from college, who was a lawyer now, pacing around the kitchen while she explained what happened, and I heard her say something about an appointment that afternoon. Getting ready for school took forever because I had to hop on one foot to the bathroom, and it hurt so bad I almost threw up when I accidentally put weight on my bad ankle. The crutches the hospital gave me were too tall even on the lowest setting, so my armpits were killing me by the time Mom dropped me off at school. I was trying to get to my locker when I passed the bathroom and heard Chloe's voice coming from inside, telling someone her dad was on the school board and would handle everything because fat girls always lie for attention anyway. I wonder what made Chloe and Hazel think they could get away with grabbing someone's stomach and twisting their ankle in front of witnesses. There's something strange about how bold they were with all those people watching and phones recording. It makes me curious. I pulled out my phone and hit record, leaning against the wall outside while she kept talking about how she barely touched me, and I probably hurt myself on purpose to get sympathy. She actually said the words, "I barely touched her ankle," which was perfect evidence since she'd been claiming she never touched me at all. The bell rang and I had to get to class, but I made sure to save the recording to 3 different places on my phone just in case. By lunch, my arms were so tired from the crutches that I could barely hold my sandwich, and I was trying to balance everything while getting stuff from my locker when Hazel appeared out of nowhere. She got right in my face, close enough that I could smell her mint gum, and started hissing about how I'd ruined everything, and their college scholarships were at risk now because of my little stunt. Her face was turning red, and she stepped toward me with her fist clenched, and I thought she was actually going to hit me again when suddenly Eddie was there, putting himself between us. I didn't even know he'd driven down from college, but apparently he'd seen the videos online and left at 5 in the morning to get here. Hazel backed up immediately when she saw him, this 6'2" guy who played college football, and she practically ran down the hallway. Eddie stayed with me the rest of the day, walking me to every single class, even though it meant he was just sitting in the hallway waiting for me. He took pictures of everyone who came near us, making notes in his phone about who was being supportive versus who was giving me dirty looks or whispering when I passed. A couple of Chloe's friends tried to approach me during passing period, but turned around as soon as they saw Eddie standing there with his arms crossed. The lawyer's office was in this fancy building downtown with leather chairs and a secretary who offered us water in actual glass bottles. The lawyer, Mrs. Wilmot, spread out all the evidence on this huge conference table. The videos from everyone's phones, the recording I'd made that morning, Isabella's screenshots, even printouts of text messages people had sent me offering to be witnesses. She started listing off legal terms while marking things with sticky notes, saying we had clear cases for assault, battery, conspiracy to commit battery because of how Chloe told Hazel to hurt me, harassment based on physical appearance, which she said was actually a protected class in our state, and Title IX violations because the school failed to provide a safe environment. She explained that with this much evidence, we wouldn't just be suing in civil court, but there would definitely be criminal charges too. We spent 2 hours at the police station after that, with a detective who kept shaking her head while watching the videos. She said in 20 years, she'd never seen students document their own crimes so thoroughly, and that usually these cases were hard to prosecute because it was one person's word against another's. But with multiple angles of video showing the assault plus Chloe's recorded admission, the prosecutor would definitely file charges. She mentioned that a lot of student victims don't report because they're scared of retaliation or think nothing will happen. But with evidence like this, even if we wanted to drop the charges, the state would probably continue prosecuting anyway because it was such a clear case of assault. 3 days later, when I went back to school, still on crutches but able to put a tiny bit of weight on my foot, I saw the cheer squad practicing in the gym without Chloe or Hazel. Coach Walker was running the practice herself with 2 junior girls acting as temporary captains, and when she saw me watching through the door, she actually came over and apologized for not being there during tryouts. She said Chloe and Hazel had been suspended pending the investigation, and she wanted me to join the squad as soon as my ankle healed. No tryout necessary. After school that day, Isabella was waiting by my locker with this huge brown folder that was so full it needed 2 rubber bands to hold it closed. Inside were 2 years worth of screenshots from Chloe's private Instagram account that only her close friends could see, where she had this whole rating system for girls' bodies with detailed notes about their problem areas and strategies for making them quit through what she called strategic pressure. There were group chat messages where she assigned her friends specific girls to target, telling them exactly what to say to break them down, even scheduling when to do it for maximum impact, like right before performances or important games. One girl named Ashley had tried out the year before, and Chloe had documented this whole campaign to make her quit, starting with comments about her acne, then moving her to the back row in every formation, then accidentally forgetting to order her uniform, until finally Ashley just stopped showing up. That evening, there was an emergency school board meeting about the incident, and the auditorium was packed with parents and students. Chloe's dad, who really was on the board, stood up and tried to minimize everything, saying it was just girls being girls, and everyone was overreacting to what was basically just tryout hazing that got a little out of hand. He was in the middle of saying that I was being dramatic when a parent in the back row stood up with her phone, saying she had something everyone needed to see. She plugged her phone into the projection system and played a video from a completely different angle that nobody had seen yet, taken by her daughter who'd been in the corner of the gym. The video showed Chloe pulling Hazel aside before the ankle incident, and you could clearly hear Chloe say, "Make sure she can't walk," while pointing at me. The whole auditorium went silent, and Chloe's dad just sat down without saying another word. That night, I couldn't sleep even though my ankle was throbbing, and I'd taken my pain meds. I kept replaying that moment when I'd pushed myself up off the gym floor and thrown my tumbling pass on basically 1 foot, the shock on everyone's faces when I landed that triple full, the way the whole gym went quiet when they realized what they'd just done to someone who could out-tumble their entire squad combined. My phone kept buzzing with messages from people at school who were finally telling their own stories about Chloe and Hazel, but what I kept thinking about was how I hadn't cried. Not once, not when she grabbed my stomach or when she twisted my ankle or when security was coming for me. I'd proved what I could do with my body, not my words. And even though everything hurt and I'd probably be on crutches for weeks, I felt proud that I'd shown them exactly who they'd tried to destroy. A week later, the detective called while I was eating breakfast, and Mom put him on speaker so we could both hear. He said Isabella's folder had opened opened up a whole new case because they found evidence of organized harassment going back 2 years with multiple victims. My ankle throbbed as I hobbled to physical therapy that afternoon on my crutches, and a girl named Jessica recognized me from the news coverage that had started spreading online. She sat next to me in the waiting room and showed me pictures on her phone of bruises Chloe had given her last year before she transferred schools. Jessica said she'd been too scared to report it then, but seeing me stand up made her ready to testify about what happened to her. 3 days later, a courier showed up at our door with a thick envelope from some fancy law firm representing Chloe's parents. The letter demanded we stop defaming their daughter and threatened to sue us for emotional distress if we didn't retract our statements immediately. Mom called our lawyer right away and he laughed when he read it, then sent them Isabella's entire folder, plus Jessica's new statement with a note saying we were ready for a very public trial. At school the next Monday, I was eating lunch alone when the entire cheer squad walked up to my table together. The temporary captain, a senior named Ashley, sat down across from me while the others stood behind her looking uncomfortable. She said they were sorry for not helping during tryouts, and that Chloe had threatened to kick anyone off the squad who tried to stop what was happening. After school, Coach Walker pulled me into her office and turned her computer monitor toward me. She clicked play on a video, and I watched myself at nationals, landing my triple full in slow motion while the crowd went wild. My old coach had sent her multiple videos of my championships, and Coach said Chloe had watched every single one the day before tryouts. She knew exactly how good you were, Coach said quietly. That's why she went after you so hard. 2 weeks after the incident, they held a mandatory assembly about bullying, and halfway through, Chloe stood up from her seat. She walked to the microphone with a piece of paper and started reading this obviously scripted apology about being stressed about college applications. The whole auditorium started buzzing with angry whispers from students who knew she was lying, and someone actually booed from the back row. After the assembly, a man in a suit approached me in the hallway and introduced himself as Mr. Kim from the school board. He said he wasn't connected to Chloe's father and had been pushing for changes to the cheer program for years without success. He asked if I'd help document the systemic problems because they were considering shutting down the whole program if the harassment pattern continued. That night, I sat on my bed staring at my gymnastics medals hanging on the wall, wondering if I even wanted to be a cheerleader anymore. The sport I'd loved my whole life felt dirty now, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Chloe wasn't done with me yet. Eddie burst into my room the next morning with his laptop and showed me an Instagram account using my name and photos. Recording her confession while she thinks nobody's listening? That's using your head instead of your fists. Plus now Chloe just played herself by admitting she touched that ankle after all the denying. Someone had edited my gymnastics pictures to make me look bigger and was posting cruel captions about my weight and making up stories about me. The account already had hundreds of followers, including college scouts who'd been interested in recruiting me for their programs. We drove straight to the police station where the detective took screenshots of everything and started filling out paperwork for identity theft and cyberbullying charges. He pulled up his computer and showed us 3 other fake accounts Chloe had made for other girls over the past 2 years. This establishes a clear pattern of criminal harassment, he said while printing out the evidence. My phone buzzed with a text from Isabella asking if we could meet her at a coffee shop downtown because she had someone important for us to talk to. 20 minutes later, we walked into the cafe where Isabella sat with a woman in a business suit who turned out to be her lawyer from when she'd sued the school district last year. The lawyer explained that Isabella had won a settlement after Chloe targeted her for months, but the NDA meant she couldn't discuss details unless criminal charges were filed. She handed me her business card and said she'd been tracking similar cases against Chloe for 3 years and had documentation the prosecutor would want to see. 3 weeks passed before my ankle finally healed enough to walk without crutches. At my physical therapy appointment, the therapist mentioned while working on my ankle that her daughter had been planning to try out for the cheer squad next year. She said after hearing what happened to me, her daughter decided to join the dance team instead because she didn't want to deal with that kind of harassment. Back at school, things seemed quiet until chemistry class when Hazel walked past my lab station carrying a beaker of diluted acid. She tripped right next to me and the beaker went flying toward my face, but I jumped back just in time. The acid splashed across my backpack and ate holes through the fabric while smoke rose from the material. Mr. Peterson saw the whole thing and immediately told Hazel to go to the office while he documented the damage with photos. The next day, principal called my mom to inform her that during their investigation, they discovered Hazel had been using her position as an office aide to access student records. She'd changed my emergency contact information the day of the assault, so the school couldn't reach my mom right away, and had also altered attendance records for other students she didn't like. That night, I noticed a car driving slowly past our house for the 3rd time that week. Mom installed security cameras the next day, and within 48 hours, we had footage of Chloe's boyfriend and 2 of his friends taking pictures of our house and writing down our license plate numbers. We took the footage straight to the police, who added it to the growing file of harassment charges. A few days later, Mom had to meet with principal about the ongoing investigation, and when she came out to the parking lot, someone had keyed deep scratches all along the driver's side of her car. Security footage showed 3 girls in hoodies, but their faces were covered, and the damage estimate came to over $3,000. Coach pulled me aside after practice to tell me that anonymous complaints had been filed with the State Athletic Association claiming I'd lied about my gymnastics titles. She'd spent hours providing documentation and proof of my championships, and now the association was investigating who filed the false reports, since filing fraudulent complaints was a criminal offense. During lunch the next week, a freshman cheerleader approached me with tears running down her face. She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots of texts Chloe had sent to the whole squad before her suspension, telling them to make my life unbearable until I left the school. The texts included specific instructions about what to do to me and threats about what would happen to anyone who didn't participate. I was at home doing homework when the prosecutor called with news that made my jaw drop. They'd discovered through subpoenaed records that Chloe's father had been using school board resources to hire a private investigator to follow me and my family. The PI had been taking photos of us for weeks and creating reports about our daily activities, trying to find anything they could use against us in court. The state attorney general's office got involved immediately because using public funds for personal vendettas was a serious crime. Chloe's father was placed on administrative leave from the school board that same day, and the private investigator's license came under review for participating in the illegal surveillance. Isabella called me over to her apartment 2 days later, and when I walked in, she had boxes of papers spread across her coffee table with sticky notes marking different sections. She'd been documenting everything about Chloe for years, and her hands shook as she pulled out a thick folder labeled therapy sessions that had over 50 pages of notes from her therapist. Isabella had been going twice a week for 2 years, trying to deal with the panic attacks and nightmares that started after Chloe targeted graduated her sophomore year. Her therapist had already agreed to testify about the long-term damage this kind of harassment causes and had written a detailed report about Isabella's PTSD symptoms. The next morning, I went back to my old gymnastics gym for the first time since the ankle injury, and my former teammates all hugged me when I walked in. Coach Sarah had saved my spot on the team and everyone was excited to have me back, but when we started warm-ups and everyone gathered around to watch me do a simple back walkover, my whole body locked up. My hands started shaking, and I couldn't make myself bend backward because all I could think about was people watching me and judging my body. I ran to the bathroom and threw up while my teammates knocked on the door asking if I was okay. 6 weeks after the incident, I was home doing homework when the doorbell rang, and through the peephole, I saw Chloe standing there with an older woman who looked just like her. Mom told me to start recording on my phone while she opened the door with the chain still on. Chloe's mother immediately started talking about how this whole situation was a misunderstanding and pulled out a checkbook from her purse. $50,000 to make this go away, she said while writing the check. Mom slammed the door and called 911 while I kept recording through the window as they pounded on our door demanding we take the money. The police arrived within minutes and arrested them both for witness intimidation and attempted bribery. When the police report became public the next day, our lawyer's phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from other families. 3 different mothers came forward saying Chloe's family had offered them similar bribes after their daughters were bullied off the squad. One family had actually taken $20,000 2 years ago to stay quiet after their daughter needed surgery from an injury during a hazing incident. The pattern was clear, and the prosecutor added conspiracy charges to the growing list. Eddie came home from college that weekend and announced he was taking the rest of the semester off to help me through the legal proceedings. He set up a whole system on his laptop with folders for every incident and started creating a detailed timeline with screenshots and timestamps of everything. He found social media posts going back 3 years, showing Chloe bragging about getting girls to quit, and even discovered a private Instagram account where she ranked cheerleaders by how easy they'd be to break. During Hazel's deposition 2 weeks later, her lawyer kept asking why she participated in the harassment when she seemed like a good student with no history of bullying. Hazel started crying so hard she couldn't breathe, and finally admitted that Chloe had videos from a party where Hazel had gotten drunk for the first time. Chloe had been holding it over her head for over a year, threatening to send the videos to colleges and ruin her future if she didn't help with the bullying. The deposition had to stop while Hazel's parents comforted her, and their lawyer immediately filed additional charges for extortion and blackmail. At the district attorney's office 3 days later, the lead prosecutor explained that this had become one of the biggest bullying cases they'd ever handled. The charges now included assault, conspiracy, extortion, witness intimidation, bribery, and criminal coercion with evidence of systematic abuse going back at least 3 years. They had testimony from 12 former cheerleaders and evidence that school administrators had been covering up complaints to protect the squad's reputation. 2 months after the incident, a local news crew showed up at our house after getting copies of the court documents through a public records request. The segment that aired that night included interviews with 5 former cheerleaders who all described the same pattern of harassment. One girl showed medical records from when Chloe had pushed her downstairs, and another had screenshots of death threats Chloe sent after she quit the team. The story went viral online with thousands of comments from people sharing similar experiences with toxic cheer programs. I started seeing a therapist the next week because I couldn't sleep and kept checking locks obsessively thinking someone was watching me. Every time I heard footsteps behind me, I'd panic, and I couldn't eat in public anymore because I felt like everyone was staring at me. My therapist explained that hypervigilance was normal after sustained harassment, but living in constant fear was exhausting my body and mind. She prescribed anxiety medication and taught me breathing exercises, but I still jumped every time my phone rang. Why does Chloe's mom think waving around $50,000 will fix everything after weeks of documented crimes? The way she just shows up with a checkbook like this is some simple business deal makes me wonder what kind of conversations happen in that house about accountability and consequences. Isabella's lawyer called with shocking news that same afternoon about what they'd discovered while investigating Chloe's family finances. Chloe's father had been transferring huge amounts from the family construction business to pay for a defense team that cost $30,000 just for the retainer. The problem was, the business was actually owned by Chloe's grandmother, who had dementia and lived in a nursing home with no idea her son was draining the accounts. Bank records showed he'd taken over $200,000 in the past month alone and forged his mother's signature on loan documents using the business as collateral. 2 days later, my mom got a call from an elderly woman who introduced herself as Chloe's grandmother. She'd been contacted by her bank about suspicious activity and discovered her son had been stealing from her for years. The nursing home staff helped her review the documents, and she was horrified to learn what had been happening with her money and her granddaughter's behavior. She came to our house that afternoon with a stack of bank statements showing over $800,000 missing from various accounts. Her hands shook as she showed us emails where her son bragged about using the money to pay for Chloe's private coaches and competition fees. She said she was cutting off all funding for Chloe's legal defense immediately and wanted to testify about how her son had always covered up Chloe's problems instead of getting her help. The next week, I tried studying for finals in the school library but couldn't focus. 3 of Chloe's friends sat at the table across from me, not saying anything but making sure I saw them watching. They'd follow me to different sections, always staying just close enough that I could hear them whispering. One of them kept taking photos of me with her phone, pretending to text but clearly aiming the camera at me. When I got up to leave, they followed me to my car and stood behind it so I couldn't back out for almost 10 minutes. I finally had to call security to make them move. That night, I got an email notification that my password had been changed for my recruitment account. Someone had hacked in and sent messages to 12 different college gymnastics programs saying I was withdrawing from consideration due to mental health issues and drug problems. Eddie helped me trace the IP address through some tech program he had, and it led straight to Chloe's boyfriend's house. We took screenshots of everything and called the detective handling our case. The FBI got involved about 10 weeks after the original incident because the email hack crossed state lines and affected federal student aid applications. They showed up at Chloe's house and her boyfriend's house with warrants and seized their computers, phones, and tablets. The boyfriend's mom tried to stop them, but they had evidence he'd used her work computer too, so they took that as well. Meanwhile, Coach announced at the next team meeting that everyone would have to complete 20 hours of training on harassment and consent. Several parents showed up angry, saying their kids were being punished for something they didn't do. One dad actually yelled that we were ruining his daughter's senior year with unnecessary workshops. My physical therapy sessions were showing progress, and I finally got full range of motion back in my ankle. The therapist did some scans and said the ligament damage might be permanent though. She explained that I'd probably always have weakness weakness there and might not be able to compete at the same level. 3 months after everything started, we had our first preliminary hearing at the courthouse. Chloe's lawyer tried to argue that I provoked the assault by showing off. The judge cut him off immediately and said athletic ability could never be considered provocation for battery. He actually laughed when the lawyer tried to claim my gymnastics skills were intimidating. After the news coverage of the hearing, I started getting calls from college scouts again. Most were cautious but interested despite the fake emails. A scout from State University called and offered me a full scholarship whether I could compete or not. She said they valued character over medals and wanted me on their team. My first official cheer practice came 3 months after the incident. The squad was polite and included me in everything, but I could tell some were only being nice because they were scared. They'd glance at coach before talking to me and made sure someone was always witnessing our interactions. During locker room cleanup the next week, one of the janitors found something weird behind a loose tile. The FBI tech team identified it as a recording device that had been there for months. They found 4 more hidden in different spots, all planted to record girls changing. The devices had memory cards full of footage that Chloe had been using to blackmail squad members into doing what she wanted. The FBI agent said this changed everything because now we were looking at federal privacy violations and potential distribution of inappropriate images of minors. The school had to send letters to every single girl who'd used that locker room in the past 2 years, and within days, the district was drowning in lawsuits from parents who wanted to know if their daughters had been recorded. The FBI tech team worked around the clock pulling data from the devices, while more investigators showed up to interview everyone who'd had access to those spaces. I watched from the hallway as they carried out boxes of evidence and sealed off the entire locker room with crime scene tape. 3 weeks later, Hazel's lawyer worked out a deal where she'd testify against Chloe for reduced charges, and she handed over screenshots from their group chat that made my stomach turn. The messages showed Chloe had detailed plans for breaking specific girls, with spreadsheets tracking their weaknesses and strategies for maximum psychological damage. She'd been doing this for years, keeping notes on which girls cried the easiest and which ones she could turn against their friends. The prosecutor said it was the most organized bullying campaign they'd ever seen. That same week, I woke up at 3 in the morning to my mom shaking me because our neighbor was pounding on the door. Someone had plastered flyers all over our neighborhood with my gymnastics photo and my weight in huge red numbers, calling me Jefferson High's fat fraud and saying I'd faked everything for attention. Mom called the police while Eddie drove around tearing them down and taking pictures for evidence, but by morning, half the neighborhood had already seen them. The police found security footage of 3 girls from the cheer squad putting them up, their faces clear as day under the streetlights. 4 months after everything started, the State Athletic Association held their hearing and permanently banned Chloe from all high school sports in Colorado. State University sent a letter the next day withdrawing her acceptance after learning about the federal charges, and her full scholarship disappeared with it. Isabella started organizing meetings for everyone Chloe had targeted over the years, and 12 girls showed up to the first one in the library conference room. They went around the circle sharing their stories, and I learned Chloe had driven 3 girls to change schools and 1 to attempt suicide. One girl showed scars on her arms from when Chloe convinced the whole school she had an STD after she refused to do Chloe's homework. Another girl's parents had to put her in therapy after Chloe spread photoshopped pictures of her that looked so real even her boyfriend believed them. Isabella had kept records of everything from her time on the squad, including recordings of Chloe planning campaigns against specific targets. 2 weeks later, I had my first gymnastics exhibition since the injury, and I could barely focus during warm-ups knowing Chloe's supporters might be watching. My ankle still hurt when I landed certain moves, but I pushed through my full routine and stuck every landing while the crowd went crazy. People were cheering and clapping, but all I could think about was whether someone was recording me to mock online later. That's when things got really dark because the FBI tech team found something in Chloe's deleted emails that changed everything. She'd been talking to some guy online who'd been coaching her on psychological manipulation tactics since she was 14. The messages showed him teaching her specific techniques to break people down and telling her which girls would be easiest targets based on their social media. He'd sent her actual manuals on psychological torture methods and encouraged her to document everything she did. The investigators traced his IP address and identified him as a 34-year-old man from Ohio who'd been doing this with teenage girls all over the country. He'd find popular girls online and train them to be his weapons, getting them to destroy other kids while he watched from behind his computer screen. The FBI arrested him at his apartment and found hard drives full of videos and messages from dozens of girls he'd been manipulating. They charged him with conspiracy, cyberstalking, and a bunch of other federal crimes that could put him away for decades. Chloe went from being the main villain to also being a victim, which made everything even more complicated legally. The prosecutors had to figure out how much was her and how much was this creep pulling her strings. Meanwhile, at school, Principal Harrison called an assembly to announce his resignation, standing at the podium and admitting he'd ignored too many warning signs over the years. He said he'd failed to protect students and couldn't continue in good conscience, then walked off the stage while everyone sat in shocked silence. The school board brought in an interim principal who'd worked in anti-bullying programs, and she immediately started interviewing every student who'd ever complained about harassment. Plot twist of the century. Turns out the Queen Bee had her own puppet master pulling strings from Ohio. Chloe went from criminal mastermind to manipulated teenager in one email discovery, which probably gave her lawyer the worst headache of his career. 5 months after that day in the gym, Mom and I sat in a therapist's office trying to process everything that had happened. The therapist helped us see how the constant stress had made us both jumpy and paranoid, how we'd stopped trusting people and started expecting attacks from everywhere. Mom broke down crying when she talked about finding those flyers and feeling like she'd failed to protect me. I realized I hadn't slept through a full night since it started, always waking up expecting to find new threats online or plastered around town. 2 weeks later, the local news website posted Chloe's psychiatric evaluation that someone had leaked from the court records. The report showed she'd been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and conduct disorder by 3 different doctors. Her lawyer went on TV saying she needed treatment at a mental health facility instead of jail time. The comments section exploded with people arguing about whether mental illness excused what she'd done to us. Our support group met that weekend to work on something positive instead of just reading the news coverage. We spent 6 hours putting together a presentation for the school board about preventing future harassment. Isabella drew up charts showing how reporting protocols could have stopped Chloe after the first incident. We proposed mandatory climate surveys every month and anonymous tip boxes in every hallway. The school board secretary said they'd review it at their next meeting in 3 months. I was picking up milk at the grocery store when I saw Chloe with her mother near the frozen foods. She looked different, smaller somehow, with dark circles under her eyes and her shoulders hunched forward. Our eyes eyes met for maybe 2 seconds before her mother grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the exit. She looked hollow, like something inside her had broken, nothing like the girl who'd twisted my ankle. 3 months passed before the trial started, and I had to testify on the second day. I sat in that witness chair for 3 hours describing every single thing she'd done to me. Her lawyer kept interrupting to ask if I was sure about details, trying to make me look confused. The prosecutor played the gym video on the huge courtroom screen and everyone could see her slapping me. The judge had to call a recess when some parents in the gallery started yelling at Chloe's family. Over the next few days, 18 other victims testified about what she'd done to them over 3 years. The prosecutor had binders full of evidence showing 47 separate incidents of harassment and assault. One girl testified that Chloe had spread rumors about her having an STD after she'd beaten her in a student election. Another said Chloe had put laxatives in her lunch every day for a month until she was hospitalized. The prosecutor showed screenshots of hundreds of fake social media accounts Chloe had created to harass people. Hazel took the stand on day 4 and broke down crying within 5 minutes of starting her testimony. She described how Chloe had recorded her in the locker room and threatened to post the video online. She turned to look at me and the other victims while apologizing for helping with the harassment. She explained how Chloe would text her threats at 3 in the morning if she didn't follow orders. The judge had to pause twice because Hazel was shaking so hard she couldn't speak. Then Chloe's own grandmother took the stand and dropped the biggest bombshell of the whole trial. She testified that she'd discovered Chloe had been stealing her credit cards and checkbooks for 2 years. Bank records showed Chloe had taken over $30,000 to pay kids to participate in bullying campaigns. She'd literally been bribing students with $100 bills to spread rumors and vandalize victims' property. The grandmother sobbed as she described finding receipts for spy cameras and recording equipment in Chloe's room. During a lunch break, 5 of Chloe's former friends approached me outside the courthouse. They said they'd been too scared to stand up to her because they'd seen what she did to people who crossed her. One girl showed me old texts where Chloe threatened to plant drugs in her locker if she didn't participate. They all said they wished they'd been brave enough to report her earlier. The FBI agent testified that afternoon about finding the recording devices and tracking the adult predator who'd been coaching Chloe online. He showed evidence that this man had been teaching her psychological manipulation tactics since she was 14. The jury members looked sick as he described chat logs where the man praised her for breaking her victims. He'd sent her actual manuals on gaslighting and emotional abuse that she'd printed and highlighted. 2 weeks after the trial ended, I competed in my first gymnastics meet since the injury. My ankle held up through warm-ups even though I was terrified it would give out during my routines. I stuck my vault on the first try and heard people screaming from the stands. When I looked up, I saw Isabella and 12 other girls from our support group holding signs with my name. I won beam, vault, and floor that day. My first competition win since moving to Jefferson. 7 months later, I sat in the courtroom watching Chloe take the stand in her own defense. She wore a navy dress that made her look younger and kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue even though no tears came out. Her lawyer asked her about the online predator, and she started talking about how this older man had convinced her that hurting other students would make her popular. The prosecutor stood up with a stack of printed messages and started reading them out loud. One message from 3 days after she twisted my ankle said she was celebrating because I couldn't compete for months. Another one showed her bragging about making me cry in front of everyone. She'd sent photos of my injuries to her friends with laughing emojis. The prosecutor kept reading message after message where Chloe described exactly how she planned to hurt different students and how good it felt when they broke down. Her face got redder with each one until she finally screamed that those were taken out of context. The prosecutor asked what context would make celebrating a broken ankle acceptable. She couldn't answer. The jury left to deliberate and came back 4 hours later with guilty verdicts on every single count. Assault, battery, extortion, criminal harassment, conspiracy, and identity theft all came back guilty. Chloe's mom started sobbing while her dad just stared at the floor. Outside the courthouse, a local news reporter asked me for a comment. I told them this wasn't just about one person, but about changing a culture that lets bullies operate without consequences. I said schools needed to protect all students, not just the popular ones. That night before sentencing, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept thinking about how this would follow both of us forever. She'd be a convicted felon at 17, and I'd always be the girl who stood up to her. The next morning, the judge gave Chloe 18 months in juvenile detention, followed by 5 years probation. She also got mandatory therapy and 500 hours of community service specifically working with anti-bullying programs. Chloe had to be practically carried out of the courtroom by her parents. 2 weeks later, the school held a big assembly where Isabella and I spoke about recognizing harassment. The new principal announced zero-tolerance policies with actual consequences like immediate suspension for physical contact and expulsion for repeated offenses. He apologized for the previous administration's failures and promised real change. Isabella talked about her own experience with Chloe freshman year and how she wished someone had stood up then. I demonstrated some basic self-defense moves and talked about documenting everything. The whole gym actually applauded when we finished. That same week, Hazel got sentenced to 6 months probation and mandatory counseling. She transferred to a school across town but sent me a letter a month later. She wrote that she was sorry for everything and thanked me for exposing the truth that freed her from Chloe's control. She said Chloe had threatened to ruin her life if she didn't help with the harassment. I kept the letter but never wrote back. 8 months after the original incident, Chloe's father got convicted of misuse of public funds and witness intimidation. The investigation showed he'd used his position on the school board to access my medical records and had threatened 3 witnesses who were going to testify against Chloe. He got 2 years in prison and was permanently banned from serving on any school board. His law firm dropped him the same day. The school district finally settled our civil lawsuit for $450,000. They admitted they failed to protect students and agreed to implement mandatory training for all staff on recognizing and addressing bullying. They also had to hire 2 full-time counselors, specifically trained in harassment cases. My mom cried when the check came because it meant I could go to any college I wanted without worrying about money. State University offered me a full gymnastics scholarship, which I accepted but decided to defer for a gap year. I wanted to focus on healing and doing advocacy work first. The announcement included my plan to study psychology so I could help other bullying victims. The support group Isabella and I started kept growing until we couldn't manage it alone anymore. So we filed paperwork to become an official nonprofit with Isabella as the director and me on the board. We spent weeks filling out forms and meeting with lawyers who helped us pro bono, and when the approval came through with a grant for $20,000, Isabella actually screamed so loud in the coffee shop that everyone stared at us. There's something odd about how quickly Chloe's father went from school board member to convicted felon. Accessing medical records leaves such an obvious paper trail that I wonder what made him think he wouldn't get caught. We used the money to hire a part-time coordinator and started visiting other schools in the district, setting up chapters in 12 different high schools by spring. 9 months after that awful tryout day, I walked into the year-end athletics banquet wearing the same dress I'd worn to homecoming, my ankle completely healed and my head held high. Coach Walker called my name for the Courage Award, and when I walked up to accept it, the entire gymnastics team stood up and cheered. She told everyone how the cheer squad had changed completely since the incident, with the new captains creating a buddy system where experienced members mentored newcomers instead of hazing them. The toxic culture that had infected the squad for years was finally dying, replaced by actual support and teamwork. I went back to the gym a few weeks later to watch the new squad practice, and it felt like walking into a completely different place. The walls had new motivational posters about respect and inclusion, the music wasn't blaring at painful levels, and girls were actually helping each other learn skills instead of mocking mistakes. 3 younger girls approached me after practice, one of them barely 5 feet tall with a soft stomach like mine, telling me they'd tried out specifically because they heard what happened to me and knew the squad had changed. They showed me their tumbling passes, and I spent an hour spotting them and fixing their form, remembering how scared I'd been at their age. The FBI investigation that started with Chloe's online activities exploded into something massive when they found the network of adults who'd been coaching teenage bullies across the country. 14 people got arrested in 7 different states, including a 30-year-old man who'd been posing as a teenage girl and teaching kids how to physically hurt their classmates without leaving marks. The case made national news as the first major prosecution linking online manipulation to real-world bullying, with prosecutors using it to push for new laws about adults who encourage minors to commit violence. My therapist's office became my safe space every Thursday afternoon, where I could finally process everything that had happened without feeling like I had to be strong for everyone else. She helped me understand that my worth was never about my weight or even my gymnastics skills, but about having the courage to stand up when everyone else stayed silent. We worked through the trauma of that day, the physical assault, the humiliation, and she taught me techniques to manage the panic attacks that still hit me sometimes when I heard loud voices in gyms. Mom and Eddie helped me pack for the summer gymnastics camp where I'd be coaching younger athletes, carefully folding the new coaching shirts with my name embroidered on them. I'd added special sessions to my curriculum about body positivity and standing up to bullying, creating workbooks and activities that would help kids recognize toxic behavior before it escalated. Eddie carried my bags to the car, while Mom triple-checked that I had everything, both of them trying not to cry about me leaving for 6 weeks. At the grocery store a week before camp, I ran into one of the male cheerleaders who'd been forced to surround me during tryouts, and we both froze in the cereal aisle. He apologized immediately, explaining he was a scholarship student who'd been terrified of losing his spot if he didn't follow orders, and we talked for 20 minutes about how Chloe had controlled everyone through fear. We agreed to move forward without the weight of that day hanging over us, and he told me he'd quit the squad and join the drama club instead, where people actually supported each other. 10 months after the incident, Isabella texted me a screenshot showing that 3 more schools had requested our presentation, bringing our total to over 40 schools reached. The movement we started had grown beyond anything we'd imagined, reaching thousands of students who were learning to recognize and report bullying before it escalated to violence. She'd hired 2 more coordinators and was working on a partnership with the state education department to make our program part of the standard health curriculum. At graduation, Principal Harrison announced I'd been selected to give a speech about resilience, and I stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of faces, including Chloe's empty chair since she was still in juvenile detention. I talked about how the worst day of my life became the catalyst for change that protected future students from similar abuse, how sometimes we have to go through hell to help others avoid it. My voice stayed steady as I described the support group, the legal changes, and the culture shift at our school, ending with a challenge for everyone to be the person who speaks up instead of staying silent. After the ceremony ended and families were taking pictures everywhere, I walked back into the gym one last time, standing in the exact spot where Chloe had grabbed my stomach. The space felt different now, filled with graduation decorations and happy voices instead of cruelty and fear, and I touched my ankle, which still ached sometimes but was strong enough to carry me forward. I took one last look at the mats where I'd proven my worth with my skills, at the walls that had witnessed both my humiliation and my triumph, then turned and walked out into the bright Colorado sunshine, ready for whatever came next. Time for me to cartwheel off into the sunset. Appreciate you letting me flip through all this with you. See you in the next routine. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.